The call went out across the stars, sent by every faction, every government, every leader who could still remember the price of war, and they waited with bated breath as the message traveled through the void to its intended target. They knew the stories they had heard, the whispers about a soldier who had fought in the darkest days of the Great War and had disappeared into the folds of time, a soldier who had become a legend, someone who could turn the tide of battle with a single glance. But no one knew if he still lived, if he would answer the call, or if he would even care after all these years. Some wondered if humanity itself had lost its taste for battle, had become soft in the luxury of peace, while the galaxy's other races adapted to their new order. They questioned if the human spirit could still be awakened, if the warfighter within could ever return after so many years of tranquility. The council leaders held their breath as days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The enemy continued its march. Unchecked worlds fell silent, systems went dark. The terror spread farther and farther, until even the bravest of the galaxy's warriors began to question if they could ever stop it. The human soldier was their last hope. The human soldier was the galaxy's last hope. But he had turned his back on war. He had turned his back on everything he had once fought for, choosing instead a quiet life far from the pain of battle, in a place where no one could find him. But the galaxy had not forgotten the devastation of the Great War, nor had they forgotten what a single human soldier had been capable of when pressed into action. The legends of his victories were written in the stars, told in hushed tones on distant worlds, and there were those who believed that the tales weren't just stories, but truth, who believed that even now the human soldier could rise again, and they clung to this hope like a dying man clings to his last breath. The silence stretched on, and the enemy grew closer still, and in the midst of this uncertainty, the galaxy's leaders realized something else. They were no longer waiting for a savior. They were waiting for a reminder of what they had lost. They were waiting for a lesson they had forgotten, a lesson that only a human could teach them: how to fight, and how to win against an enemy that refused to be understood, how to fight when every strategy failed, how to win when the odds were too great, and when the battlefield itself seemed to collapse under their feet. The galaxy had forgotten these things, but humanity had not. They had lived through the hardest battles. They had endured the greatest losses. They had fought wars on their own soil and survived. Now all that was left was to call upon the one who had taught them how to endure, how to push forward when all seemed lost. And the message was sent. The call to the soldier had been made. The galaxy held its breath once more as it waited for the answer that could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The call was met with silence for days, and then weeks. The galaxy waited, wondering if their hope had been misplaced, wondering if the human warrior they had called upon had indeed disappeared into the shadows of history forever. But just when despair was beginning to take hold, the signal came through. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was unmistakably human. The message was simple: one word, a name, and a promise. The name of the soldier who had once led humanity to victory in the Great War. His reputation was so vast, so legendary, that even a single word from him carried the weight of countless battles fought and won. The galaxy's leaders exhaled in unison as the message was decoded. It was a single transmission from a remote outpost on the edge of the galaxy, and the word within it sent chills down the spines of all who heard it. "I'm coming." That was all the message said, but it was enough. Humanity's greatest soldier had heard the call, and now the galaxy's fate rested in his hands. Once again, the threat that had been looming like a dark cloud across the stars had found its match in the one person the galaxy never thought would return. The warrior who had disappeared from the face of the galaxy after the war now reappeared from the depths of forgotten space. But the galaxy was no longer the same. The enemy they faced was far different than any they had ever fought before. This was not a war of ships and tactics alone. This enemy was insidious. It did not fight with armies. It fought with fear, with silence, with a creeping darkness that turned the strongest into cowards and shattered the bravest hearts. Entire fleets had fallen without a single shot being fired. There was no honor, no glory in this war, only survival. It was a war of shadows, one that left no room for mistakes and no hope for weakness. And yet, even as humanity's greatest soldier began to gather his forces, the galaxy knew that the true nature of the enemy was still beyond their understanding. Reports continued to flood in from the outer colonies. Fleets went missing, entire planets vanished without warning, and the only trace left was the unnatural stillness, that followed it was as though the enemy didn't just destroy their victims, they erased them from existence, as if they had never been there at all. And it wasn't long before the Council realized that this new enemy was not just a threat to their military or their alliances, but to the very fabric of reality itself. How could you fight something that didn't leave any evidence that it had even been there? How could you stop an enemy that could not be understood or tracked? How could you even hope to win a war against such an overwhelming force? The galaxy's leaders turned to humanity's greatest soldier for answers. They had no choice but to trust him. They had no choice but to hope that the human warrior who had once turned the tide of the Great War could once again lead them to victory against an enemy that defied all understanding. And though the soldier was still distant and unwilling to share all his plans with them, the one thing that was clear was this: if the galaxy was to survive, the war was far from over, and the real battle had only just begun. As humanity's greatest soldier prepared to step into the fray, the galaxy's leaders gathered once again to discuss their dwindling options. Their military might could no longer stand against the enemy's unpredictable assaults. Their tactics were useless against an adversary that did not play by any known rules, and their technology, though advanced, was no match for the enemy's unnatural speed and stealth. In the face of such overwhelming darkness, the soldier was their last hope. But even he did not have all the answers. His reputation as a hero was built not just on his strength or his battles, but on his unyielding ability to adapt to the chaos of war. It was this very ability that the galaxy needed most now. But even as the Council placed their hopes in him, they couldn't help but wonder if humanity had been so consumed by peace for so long that it had lost its edge. The soldier was a myth, a living legend who had fought in wars that no longer seemed to matter, and now he was forced to confront an enemy that they barely understood, a foe that seemed to twist space itself and leave nothing but destruction in its wake. What good would a soldier of the past be in a war unlike any they had ever fought before? There were no rules this time. No honor, no glory, just the primal need to survive. It was a war of survival, and no one could predict how it would end. Yet the soldier did not hesitate. His path was clear. He would fight as he always had, with everything he had. But he would not be the soldier the galaxy remembered. He had no interest in reliving the past. He had lived through the horrors of the Great War and carried the scars, both physical and mental, that came with it. His return was not about glory or heroism. It was about the survival of the galaxy, and in his mind that meant doing whatever it took to break the enemy's stranglehold on the galaxy. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, he had been ready to lay down his weapon long ago. But he knew deep down that this time the galaxy could not afford to let him walk away. This time he had to answer the call, not for fame, not for duty, but because the very existence of the galaxy depended on it. But even as the soldier readied himself for what lay ahead, the true nature of the enemy began to reveal itself. In the aftermath of each battle, there were whispers from the few survivors who had escaped the clutches of the shadowy invaders. They spoke of creatures who did not speak or shout. Their presence could only be felt in the cold grip of fear that spread through the hearts of all who encountered them. And there was something worse than the terror they spread. It was the silence they left in their wake. There was no roar of victory, no cry of surrender, only a crushing silence that filled the space where life once was. Whole worlds turned to ghost planets, became nothing more than empty husks floating in the void, as though they had been erased not just from existence, but from memory itself. It was as if these invaders had the power to remove all traces of their passing. And soon the soldier realized something that would change everything. This was not just an enemy to be fought. This was an enemy that sought to undo the very fabric of reality itself. They were not here just to conquer. They were here to erase everything. And the soldier had only one choice. He had to find a way to fight back against this force before it consumed everything in its path, before even the memory of the galaxy's existence was lost forever. The soldier knew that this enemy was unlike anything he had ever faced before. Their methods were far beyond conventional warfare. They didn't just fight to win, they fought to erase the very existence of everything they touched. Entire fleets and planets vanished without a trace. And the more the soldier learned, the more he realized this was not a war of tactics or strength. It was a war of willpower, a war that required something deeper than skill or strategy. It required the strength to hold on when everything around you was fading away. And that was where humanity's greatest strength lay, not in their weapons or their ships, but in their refusal to ever give up. The soldier had seen that in his people during the Great War. He had seen it in the eyes of every soldier who fought beside him, their ability to endure when others would have broken, their refusal to surrender even when there seemed to be no hope left. And now that same spirit would have to rise again as he prepared to leave the galaxy into battle against an enemy that threatened to undo everything they had fought for. In his mind, there was no room for hesitation, no time for doubt. He knew that the price of victory would be high, but he also knew that the galaxy had no choice but to fight back. The Council of Galactic Leaders watched him with a mixture of awe and fear. They had placed all their hope in this one human soldier. They had asked him to face the impossible, and they knew he would do whatever it took to succeed. But what if it wasn't enough? What if their last hope was doomed from the start? The soldier understood their doubts, but he couldn't afford to entertain them now. There was no time for second-guessing, only action. He began to assemble a coalition of forces, not just from the galaxy's strongest factions, but from those who had once been enemies. They all understood the stakes now. There was no room for division, no room for pride. It was a war of survival, and everyone had to fight as one. Even the most distrustful factions began to join forces under the soldier's leadership, and though they remained wary of humanity's role in this new war, they also knew that this human had led them to victory before, and if anyone could do it again, it was him. The soldier's plan was simple but brutal. He would strike at the heart of the enemy, not in the conventional way, but by breaking through the shadows that hid them, by drawing them out into the open. His tactic was not to confront them head-on, but to force them into the light, to face the galaxy's wrath in a way they could not escape. There were no guarantees that it would work. The enemy was unpredictable and dangerous. But if they could force them to reveal themselves, if they could understand their true nature, then perhaps they could find a way to fight back and win. But even as the soldier prepared for the first strike, he knew that this would not be a simple battle. It would be a war of attrition, a war that would test the galaxy's resolve to its very limits. They had no idea what they were truly facing yet, but one thing was certain: if they didn't face it together, if they didn't unite and fight with everything they had, they would be erased, just like the rest of the Forgotten Worlds. The soldier had seen too much of that already, and he would not let it happen again, not on his watch. Not on humanity's watch. The first strike was a gamble. The soldier knew that, but it was their only chance to force the enemy to reveal itself. The coalition had united under his command, and together they launched an assault unlike anything the galaxy had seen in decades. They moved fast and with precision, hitting key enemy strongholds across the outer colonies, hoping to draw the invaders into open conflict. They struck in the dead of night, when the enemy ships were still cloaked in the shadows, hoping to catch them off guard. But what they encountered was nothing like they had expected. The enemy was ready. Their ships did not emerge from the dark, but seemed to simply materialize, as if they had been waiting the entire time, as if they knew the soldier's plan before he even set it in motion. The battle was fierce, the air filled with the crackle of energy blasts and the roar of engines as ships collided and exploded in a symphony of destruction. But even as the soldier and his forces fought bravely, the enemy seemed to only grow stronger. They had no weaknesses, no apparent vulnerabilities. Every blow struck against them was absorbed, and their numbers only seemed to multiply. The soldiers who had once fought alongside the human warrior felt the terror rising in their chests. They saw their comrades falling one by one, and knew that they were facing something they could not comprehend. The soldier pushed forward, knowing the cost of failure would be catastrophic. He fought like a man possessed, cutting through the enemy lines with ferocity that was almost unnatural. But even he could feel the weight of this battle wearing on him. His mind raced as he searched for any weakness, any sign that they could win. But the more he fought, the more he realized that the true enemy was not just the invaders themselves, but the fear they instilled in everyone they encountered. This fear was more than just terror. It was a crushing weight that clouded their judgment and twisted their will. It made the bravest hesitate and the strongest falter. It made entire fleets crumble under the pressure of its influence. And the soldier understood then that this was the true weapon of the enemy. It was not their ships or their strength. It was the silence, the dread, the coldness that seeped into the hearts of those who fought against them. It was the absence of hope that was the enemy's most dangerous tool. The soldier pushed forward relentlessly, leading the charge through the chaos. But even as they fought, the enemy's presence loomed larger. The air was thick with the fear that had begun to take root in his own mind. And he knew that if they didn't act soon, if they didn't find a way to break through the enemy's hold, the war would be lost. But despite the odds, despite the terror that surrounded him, the soldier refused to give in. He had been to hell and back before. He had faced death and walked away. And now he would do it again for the galaxy, for his people. He wouldn't let the fear win. He wouldn't let the enemy erase everything they had fought for. Not when humanity was capable of so much more. The soldiers around him looked to him for guidance. As the battle raged on, they saw the determination in his eyes and drew strength from it. They fought not just for survival, but for something more. They fought for their memories, their past, their future. And they fought because humanity's greatest warrior had led them into battle once again, showing them that even in the face of the greatest darkness, the human spirit could not be extinguished. The soldier had not just called them to fight, he had reminded them of who they were and why they'd fought. And now together, they would push back against the shadows that threatened to consume them all. The battle raged on, but the soldier could feel the shift within his forces. The fear that had once gripped them had begun to recede ever so slightly. They were no longer reacting to the enemy's terror. They were fighting back with purpose, their minds focused on survival, but also on the hope that they might actually defeat this unseen enemy. They followed his lead as he cut through the enemy lines, his blade sharp, his mind sharper still. But every strike he made was tempered with the knowledge that the true battle was not being fought on the battlefield. It was being fought within the hearts and minds of every soldier. The enemy's strength was not in their ships or weapons, but in their ability to instill fear in those who faced them. It was the silence that made the soldiers doubt themselves, made them question their actions. And the soldier knew that breaking that silence would be the key to ending this war. But that would require something even more dangerous than confronting the enemy itself. It would require confronting the darkness within the soldiers themselves. The doubt, the fear, the memories of past battles and losses, all of these things were still lurking deep within each of them, waiting to consume them. When the time was right, the soldier had faced his own demons long ago, and now he would help his people face theirs. But the war was far from over, and as the soldier led his forces deeper into the enemy's territory, he knew they were approaching the final confrontation. The enemy had not yet revealed its true nature, but he could feel it closing in on them like a shadow, wrapping around their every move. Their attacks were becoming more aggressive, more erratic, as if they were trying to overwhelm him and his forces. Before they could find the heart of this mysterious foe, it was then that the soldier realized that the true enemy was not just a single force, but a vast network of power that stretched beyond the galaxy itself. It was something ancient, something that had existed long before the first stars had burned, and it had waited for the right moment to strike. It was a force that had always been present, hiding in the dark spaces between the stars, pulling the strings, and now it was rising to reclaim its dominion. The soldier knew then that the final battle would not be fought with guns or ships. It would be fought with the very will to survive. He gathered his forces and pushed forward to the heart of the enemy's domain, where the darkness seemed to pulse with life. They were nearing the core, where the true enemy lay hidden in plain sight. It was not a creature or a fleet, but something more insidious. It was a force of will that could manipulate time and space itself. And if they were not careful, if they didn't learn to overcome the fear that gripped them, it would erase them all. The soldier knew the final price of victory would be high. It always was, but he was willing to pay it, because he understood one thing above all else: humanity could not be erased. They could not be forgotten. They would fight to the end to preserve their existence and the memories of all they had fought for. And as he and his forces made their final push into the heart of the enemy's domain, the soldier knew that this would be the ultimate test. It would be a fight to the very end, a fight not just for survival, but for the future of the galaxy and for the legacy of humanity itself.